Welcome to the 4th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors Conference.
This is a panel that was interesting because what we're trying to do with this conference in many ways is trying to sketch out the development of the career path and also the information. So we have, we had our clearance for creatives, which is really a very fundamental nuts and bolts clearance piece. And then we had a nightmare clearance, which is very much a getting deep into the subject. We had things like the absolutely fascinating camera roll one, which is basically all about on-camera stuff, which is super advanced stuff at an extremely high level. And then we had things that were very general, and then we had our mentorship sessions. This is really in many ways talking about how do you go from being a music supervisor that has a solo practice, you get the job, you get lucky enough to have a gig, and as you start to develop things, you start to get busy. And then maybe you're able to bring on an intern. And we have, by the way, had a whole panel about interns and how they should be paid and how you should take care of insurance and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully there is a holistic point of view to all this information. But we wanted to kind of close out the day a little bit with what happens when you're trying to build a team and what are the challenges you come across. Some of them are economic, some of them are practical, some of them are creative, and a lot of them are about interpersonal things and how you collaborate with a group, how you cultivate talent. Wow, we're turning people away already. Come on, guys, hustle, hustle. No, I'm just kidding. So these are two friends of mine and two people I respect enormously, and I feel like what's exciting about watching their careers is getting a sense of how different people approach that problem and that opportunity, and that success sometimes breeds a whole new set of problems. So first of all, Manish Raval is an extraordinary music supervisor. Why don't you tell us a little bit about sort of how your career has moved, and then Andrew, we can kind of do the same.
I'm Manish Raval. I own Aperture Music. I own it with Tom Wolf, who's my partner. We both worked at a company over 20 years ago doing music supervision, and we left that company and started our own company. Worked for Happy Walters, and as a lot of supervisors have come through that.
Went through the happy factory.
Through the Happy Factory. And so we left 20 years ago. This year is actually our 20th year of Aperture Music. And we started primarily as film music supervisors because that's kind of what the jobs were. Over the years, I think about 10 years ago is when we hired our first employee. 5 years ago, we hired our second. We're a company of 4 people. We do all of our work, just the 4 of us. It's, we've seen as the industry kind of changes and grows, we kind of had to do it along the way as well. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, and Andrew, let's hear a little bit about Good Years.
Great. I'm happy that I asked the company that you worked at before, because my first internship ever out of college was at Immortal Entertainment, which was Happy Walters' company or something like that.
More Happy Factory.
Yeah, it was one wing of the Happy Factory, I guess. So that was my first internship, and my second internship. After several years, I couldn't get a paying job as a music supervisor, so I then returned to my passion and my roots of music supervision and got an internship with Thomas. And then I was there for only like 6 or 7 weeks, but Thomas was my boss for a while. Then I got a job on a TV show on The Sopranos, and then that show was ending, and I interviewed with Manish and Tom, and I didn't get that job, but Manish was
That was the first time we've ever interviewed anyone.
Yeah.
And so but you're doing really well, and I think so I think you made the right decision.
No, it worked out great. The excuse that you gave was that you needed somebody with a lot of technical editing skills, which is very important, which I've come to learn later on. And I didn't know that before, and I wasn't too heartbroken eventually because you then recommended me for another job at Media Arts Lab. So I made the transfer to advertising. I worked at Media Arts Lab on all the Apple stuff for 4 years, and that was until 2011. And then I started my own company then called GEMS.
Yeah, what I find interesting is when you go from 1 to 2, there's something huge in that shift. Because I got, and I think in many ways as music supervisors, there's and again, in a way, I don't know if you ever did with you. You went from 2 to 3, basically.
Yeah, Tom's always been my partner. I've always operated with someone to bounce ideas off of. So I come from that background. Grew up being in bands, so I always gravitated towards, a camaraderie and, brotherhood. And so I've always operated that way. I've never been like on my own and, or Tom was on his own. We've had years when we were busier, where by nature you kind of default, where I'll just do these shows, you do those shows. And I, hands down, feel like those were our most stressful, worst years of the company. I work better as like part of a team.
Do you find also that there are certain responsibilities that you guys would gravitate towards, or do you think that you put a lot of effort into splitting things up, quote unquote, fairly, just to kind of feel like you're both dealing with like taking the trash out and making the bed and all that kind of stuff?
Tom he's older than me. He's 10 years older than me, he's almost the same age as my older brother. And so in many ways, I kind of lean on him in that way, as far as, maybe just the difference of someone coming into themselves in the 70s and what musically that is to a person is different than me. So I think we play off each other like that. We have a show right now that is heavily 90s music, which was my youth. And for him is like the worst music, some of the worst music has ever been made. So it's like, we kind of like, and it's like, hey, trust me, no, this is a good one. And I, lean on him with like, okay, like Todd Rundgren it is,
Well, I mean, Andrew, when you think about it, because you've actually been through so many different incarnations, I mean, you know what it's like to work in, and this is also kind of fun because, again, we have our own history. I remember when you first said, I got a job, and I'm like, great, what's the job? Because I was like happy you were going to get paid. And you said, I'm going to be working on The Sopranos. I'm like, motherfucker. And my first thought was, how the hell did you just leapfrog over me? Because, of course, I was just wrapping up 6 Feet Under, I think, and was trying to figure out why nobody would hire me. And just thought, like, did everything just fall apart? Like, I couldn't quite believe it. And then I realized when you were kind of moving forward, and this was one of the things I noticed about you early on, was you have a sharpness, you're an intuitive music supervisor. You're somebody who's meant to do this, And so I think it's interesting to imagine going into a Sopranos environment where you're working kind of in support of a producer who's acting in essence as a music supervisor, and then going into a very corporate environment. That transition must have been kind of fascinating. How did you handle that transition? Did you feel like you were stepping forward or backwards? And
thank you for all the kind words, first of all. It's very nice to hear.
And saying motherfucker.
Yeah, I've been waiting for you to say that for a long time, so it's great. I think that I knew early on with both of those jobs and interning for you, and at that time, I knew that I was a newbie and that I didn't know a lot. So I knew to listen a lot. I remember, the creator of The Sopranos was running everything. It was the 7th show, so I was just happy to have some place on that body of work, and that was it. And I was so thrilled to get to like pitch in songs, to find songs that went into the bada bing, and some that found their way into the background of that show. That was a dream. So just doing that was incredible. And then I didn't know that the job existed except for a few films at that time, and then a couple TV shows, The Sopranos and The OC, and maybe at that time, I think there was the hospital TV dramas as well. And then I got that opportunity at Media Arts Lab working on the Apple account, and that was amazing too. And I remember going in there, and I think in the first month, it was a pretty small collaborative agency at that point, and I probably piped up and spoke out of turn. And then the very intimidating and confident president of the company sat me down right after the meeting. He lined for me. He's like, "Can we talk for a second? For the first couple months, I'd like you to not to talk in meetings." So which I
He was English, I assume.
he might have been British, yeah. But I guess we're talking about collaboration and starting off, and I think that junior role or whatever it is, you really are out of your element for a while, and learning and just soaking in as much as you can is a really important, that's a very important time to just sit back and soak it in if you can. So it was just the beginning of those times.
Manish, have you had that situation too when you're bringing new people into your company and having to figure out how to set the stage for them to succeed, as opposed to? Because I think that's always an interesting thing. I know that I've had in my own team challenges where I've realized am I in the way? Am I overwhelming everything and making no space for people to succeed? And I think that's something that comes up a lot for me, is just trying to figure out how do I make sure that the company is reflective of my values and my standards, and I'm also cultivating talent amongst people and letting them be themselves and not putting them in a position when they have to either apologize or at the same time be disrespectful, which is also sometimes a problem too.
We haven't had too much experience with that because we over the years we didn't have interns, we didn't have part-time help. We literally went from the two of us for 10 years to then hiring our first employee. And then for us, it was just a matter of listening, making sure that we were all on the same page creatively. Luckily, we were. I think if we weren't, then I think there would have been a lot of things to learn to do differently. But luckily, creatively, we all were on the same page. We're able to kind of benefit from each other and enhance each other. And we just felt that communication was very key. And one of the things I remember imparting on our when we first hired someone, we were all in a meeting and we were pitching stuff, and he had at one point said, "Yeah, well, the reason why I think this song is great is because da 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 da." And after the meeting, I said, "There's no I. It's we think this song is great, okay? Because we're a team, and even though I'm the boss, I'm not speaking for all of us, or I'm not speaking for myself only. I'm speaking for all of us." And so that's for me the hardest thing of trying to make sure that. And then we've hired someone in the last 5 years, and from hiring, and that was a different process when we realized how important being creatively on the same page is. To hire that person, we just asked people to make us a mixtape, and that was your interview. And we hired this girl who was in her senior year of college off of her mixtape, and she's been with us for 5-6 years now. And but it was that the key was that seeing that creatively we're on the same page. To me, without that, everything else won't work unless that piece of the pie is filled.
I've had actually a very different, but yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, good. Were you about to? I was going to throw that question to you. I know I'm not the moderator here, but I do have that same question. And it's just to parse this out, A, because I'm curious, and B, it might be helpful. It sounds like at Aperture, you guys, I know you were saying this with Tom, but you guys really do collaborate on almost all your projects. And then I know that Thomas, you're different. You have a big team, and you guys split up projects. Is that right?
We're also a team of 4.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're the same size.
And we actually struggle sometimes with the same things. I mean, we kind of call each other in moments of panic and
You're like, is
Yeah,
this a
come here,
problem that you have too? And you're just like, oh.
Is it okay to say this, or is
Right.
it okay to do that?
And part of the, I think, which is interesting about this subject as a whole is that we're kind of being forced to be entrepreneurs, and we're also forced to be psychologists, and we're also forced to be kind of like, responsible economic leaders, and stabilizing forces. And, as a music supervisor, you have to do 15 things already. And then if you add in a business component, it's like now it becomes 30 things that you have to be.
Getting stressed out already.
It's totally stressful. And it's interesting because if I think about my team actually does have very different tastes. And I think that I went very much about gut instinct, certainly, but also about attitude and about diligence. Like, I know that Yvette was the first person that was sort of a full-time person that went for a long run with me. And one of the reasons that I think Yvette and I worked so well together was that her quality control was so high. And I do really well, and then I do really terribly. And I needed a stabilizing force, and she was very much a stabilizing force. And because I knew she always had my back, I knew that I would always find ways to hopefully cultivate her creativity and give her opportunities and not step in the way. And I don't know whether I'm always successful at it, but I know that I always want what's best for her, and I believe that she always wants what's best for me. It didn't matter to me that the music that she would bring to the table reflected what I thought. It mattered to me that it would be an exciting idea that I would not have thought of and that I would have to give serious consideration to. And I think that the discipline that we had, just the two of us, reviewing work and constantly talking through what is it doing for the scene? How is it contributing to the storytelling? Is this a good idea? Do we want to open up the idea of having a songwriter create an original song, or are we just asking for a world of hurt because of the complexity of the situation that we have? And by being able to have those conversations together, I always had a mitigating force that would temper some of my more risk-taking choices, and at the same time have somebody that would throw an idea that's really innovative and really interesting I never would have thought of. And I think that that was in many ways the development. And then when we brought Michelle Johnson on board, Michelle had a different set of skills, but she also had, like Yvette, absolute meticulousness. I knew that the delivery of the work was always going to be fantastic and better than what I could deliver. Both of them deliver, I think, better than I do. And at many times, creatively, they do much more innovative work than I do. So I feel like they're finding ways of surpassing my contribution, and then I have to let my own ego get out of the way enough to recognize that this is an asset for the company, that this is not a question of me being elbowed out of my own company. But I have to definitely admit that there's times when I find myself wondering whether I've made a mistake, or I've opened up too much space, or I've allowed for a situation that's going to create dissatisfaction for the group. And that opens up that interesting thing of like, how do you find a way to have a harmonious group? And Andrew, when I turn this to you, you have a team of how many right now? Yeah, 4. So do you find that and I think the band dynamic is a great one, right? I think that the band of 4 has a certain power to it. But if the band of 4 starts to have solo operators, or has like, Bono and then the 3 other dudes in the band, you kind of have a situation on your hands. You have to be like, okay, well, how do we fix this? And then how do you find a way to grow where everybody begins to start doing it without it all being their solo records? Or, oh, well, we have to let the Edge solo for 5 minutes because that's really part of the deal here, and everyone kind of sits there and goes, all right. You want it to be something where it organically develops in a dynamic and exciting way. And I'm curious for you how you've seen that process happen.
In a sense, I'm jealous of what you were describing earlier, Manish, of kind of coming up in a collaborative context as part of a band, and then just automatically having a partner going into it. I think that, I don't know, Thomas, at least from my experience working with you, you were maybe a little more similar to me in that you were a lone wolf naturally. Yeah, when I was interning for Thomas, I feel like he'd do most of his work from like 5 and like after sunset, and then stay up to like 4 in the morning in a perch in his house, and like, because that's when it's quiet and that's when it's peaceful, and you can really do a lot of productive work and do a lot of productive creative work. I think that I have those tendencies, and I also know how important it is to collaborate, to have those discussions with one or two or three other people, and to have creative input from a ton of people, and to be able to, for everyone to justify their creative choices and to get out of your comfort zone, and how just crucial all of that is. I spent my first, probably it was like 6 months after starting my company, working out of a room the size of a tiny little closet. And I quickly understood that I was going crazy and I had no outside input, and I wouldn't even meet with clients at this point. It was just like me and my computer, and it was insane. And so then I brought on an intern, and honestly, just having the intern there to talk, to like go to lunch and talk about projects was so helpful. He didn't know what he was doing really,
Right.
but like I did like just a sounding board so I could speak with
It's like
somebody
your
else.
coyote buddy.
It was rough. Yeah.
Almost like just to hear yourself talk to someone
Sometimes, yes.
is helpful.
Yes.
Totally.
It can still be a solo job, but it's better if it's not a solo job.
Agreed.
Well, it's interesting. Let me ask both of you guys, because there's different ways to put together your team, your supervision team, and I've talked to other supervisors, and some do it very differently. Some hire people, and there's a ceiling. It's you're a coordinator. You're gonna get to here, and that's it.
Right.
You know, you're not gonna get into the room with the director, or the producers, and we don't run that way. Not that we have rules, but I mean, John Leahy, who works for us, he's supervising a ton of stuff on his own that he also brings into the company. We are giving some projects, if we, instead of passing on them because we don't really want to do them, we'll offer them to Allison, who works for us, if she wants to kind of take a lead on and do her own show, get her own credit. Just throwing to you guys, like, how do you, when putting together your team, do you put it together under the sense of, okay, this is kind of my company, my domain, and is there, you know, are you gonna let your coordinators kind of take a bigger role?
I mean, I think for me, I feel like I build everything based upon my own inadequacies. You know, I feel like I try really hard to be self-conscious about what I don't do well, and I think that I try really hard to choose people who cover areas that I know that I can excel in, but I can learn from. Now, that means that when those people have those skill sets, sometimes they don't really enjoy cultivating those skill sets forever. It's like, hey, you're really good at clearance letters. Well, it doesn't mean that you want to do clearance forever. Or you're really good at being able to like work a room, you know, because you're kind of a very confident person and people want to be around you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to be doing only that. So I think the tricky part in many ways is both creating opportunities, you know, and then how much you do shared projects. Like, I think one of the major challenges my company has had is in that exact transition from co-supervising to, okay, you're really doing it, but we both get the credit. And now I feel suddenly a little bit awkward because I'm not as fully up to speed on it. And I feel less like I should be speaking in the room. And because I'm somebody who has a hard time being disingenuous or pretending, I end up, and I also don't cultivate personal relationships outside of work with my clients. So I don't create, you know, I don't play tennis with people I work with. As much as I love the idea at times, I just feel that that opens a series of problems. And most of my mentors survived on that. Like, they were agreeable, enjoyable people that would hang out with executives that would hire them over and over again. And I could see that they would be doing things that had nothing to do with what they wanted to do in leisure environments to keep that account. And I never wanted that. I always wanted the work to speak for itself. And that's why I keep a little bit more distance. That creates an open space potentially for somebody else to step into that role because they might have different boundaries. So I think it's a tricky thing. I think you want to cultivate opportunity and you want to help people develop, but you also want to make sure that you don't create resentments where people feel like they're doing all the work and you're getting all the credit. And unfortunately with my company, that's been frequently the issue where I think a lot of the work has been shared, but it's easier for people to use my name or throw me in the mix because, I don't know, I speak well, or I'd like to be in public, or whatever it is, And I think that that's one of the things where I try to be balanced about it, but I don't know if I'm always successful at that. And I think that if there's anything which I feel like I have to be self-critical about, it's making enough space and being able to let people find their moment, and at the same time recognize that sometimes those moments don't come so easily, and they just have to work their way through the frustration of being in somebody else's shadow, even though they don't need to be and they shouldn't be. That's a very honest answer, I guess.
It's a balance, right? And it's, working with a team is always a balance. Then I guess that if there's a hierarchy in the team, that's a different balance to consider. I think when I started, it was definitely like, I never thought that I would be working with anybody else as a music supervisor. And then my intern became my employee, and then I had another employee, but I didn't think about it as much as a shared responsibility, as much as like somebody there to support. And then that's, I think, totally changed. I'm down to shed and share responsibility as much as possible and put whoever's the right person for that job on the job, and recognize that one person as the figurehead of the company, let's say, can only do so much, and it's better if there's multi-headed.
I mean, you want the company to always have a qualitative brand that communicates honestly what it is. And I think that when you're offering people the opportunity to do a solo project, you're always risking that they're going to do things that you may not necessarily agree with, and that you may have to have a conversation about, or may have to figure out if it works. And that becomes a situation where you don't always find a diplomatic way of doing that. So I think the trick of it in many ways is trying to keep the social dynamics in the group strong, whether it's changing the pairings of supervisors, which is usually a pragmatic thing, about availability. You put two people on a project because if one person's not available, the other one can go in the room. But sometimes fate throws a curveball at you, and suddenly you're like, well, I guess I'm doing a lot of projects with this person, and they're doing other projects separately, and now it's kind of like we now have two different teams that are operating independently of each other, and now the communication starts to break down. So that's always a risk.
How much of a role does how much of a role does perfectionism come into the dynamics of working with a team? And just to clarify that, I think maybe it's different. And I work primarily in advertising, and I know you guys work in film and TV. It might just be a grass is always greener type of mentality, but I feel like in film and TV you have more leeway to play around and experiment, and you have, you get brought onto a film. It's going to take a lot for you to get kicked off of that film.
You'd be surprised.
Maybe you're getting kicked off on a lot of films we don't know about. But at your TV show, you're on your second season, you get to like, from my perspective, we get hired on a job, and it's it's an advertising project, and you have maybe 2 days to turn it around, and you're getting paid a sum of money for that specific task, and so it needs to be perfect. And so I feel like I'm always more tight clenched about everything that we are delivering as a company because of that dynamic. And if it was, and so yeah, I'm curious what it's like for your guys' perspective when it comes to that.
What's interesting, because the world of advertising and then film and television, it's so different, music supervision wise. I tend to shy away from advertising because of the distance that I tend to be from the actual decision maker, the client or whoever is making the decision. Whereas with film and television, I'm usually 9 times out of 10 in the room with the person. Hey, what do you think of this? Great, not great. And that's the communication, that's the relationship. With advertising, when we've done it, you've got to put together 20 songs, and it goes into ether, and you don't know who's sending it to who, to send to who weighs in on it, and how many other supervisors in town are also sending their 20. It's a very different process, and I think that like I'm anxious when I work on an ad because of the nature of that type of delivery or
I have the same thing. It's really nerve-wracking.
yeah. Whereas I think I don't know if it's perfection, but it's just a different relationship with the person who's making the decision. It's I think it's just you're more hands-on and it's more personal with film and television. Right? Do you feel that way?
I definitely do. I mean, I think what's exciting about working on a project is, like, I think all of us have an artistic sensibility to us, and there's something about us both through our empathetic ability to do storytelling and our interest in music and our insatiable ability and our work ethic that is the combination of it. What I find very difficult about advertising is that I don't get feedback. I don't really know what's going on. I kind of hope it's going to work, and I begin to do something I don't do that often in television, which is saying, oh, we should put this in there because it's kind of a lowest common denominator, and I bet this would be great in a Target ad. And we start to get sarcastic and start to get a little bit cynical and start to throw things in there just in this very dismissive kind of bullshitty way. And then I think to myself, like, if I was receiving this, I would probably almost sense that sense of bullshittiness. Like, they know that they went to me because I'm probably going to throw weirder ideas at them that are going to be a little bit deeper, more abstract than maybe the people they would normally go to, because we're not doing advertising regularly. So to throw in the bunts, it kind of feels wrong to me. And then I have to second guess it. And I think, what's wrong with you? Like, do you want to not get hired again? Like, give them the hit song that they want, It's like, it just got released, and hopefully, and then you find out, oh, it's already been in a Target ad. I'm like, oh, man. So I think the hard part for me is I don't know. And because I don't know, I place so much additional information into a group of people I've never met, I don't have engagement with. When I'm in a room with a showrunner, I can look them in the eye and ask them to give me feedback. They may not be able to do it in a way that is going to fully help me get what I want, but it gives me just enough to kind of go back in. And that need to, like, find a way to get to the right answer and to please, in a sense, is sort of like, it feels rewarded through the challenge. And at the same time, it's also horrifying when you have a hard time with a new showrunner or a new filmmaker and you realize, I think they hired me for different reasons than than the job really requires. And then you're like, I don't know if I'm the right person for it. And then you get into the economics of it, like, okay, do I walk away from a project because it feels a little bit off, or do I find a way to shift to do this job well? And then it hopefully becomes really good, which is tremendously rewarding. Sneaky Pete was a good example. Like, it was very challenging for us to work with the original showrunners on Sneaky Pete, but we found a way to communicate really well. And I think that process was, for me, a great reminder about the joy of finding a common language when you could very easily say, oh, this is never going to work great. And I feel like...
tweak?
What's that?
What did you tweak? What did you change?
I tweaked the way I approached it. I tweaked the way I approached it. I realized that I had to find another way of telling the story with a different nomenclature and a different set of tonal values. And I feel really good about it. And this is Yvette and I actually both really did it together. And I think the differences between us also were really helpful. So we learned to play ball in, like, Japan. So it's like, okay, we're a really good team in Minnesota, and now we're gonna go to Japan, and we're gonna, like, new language, new set of rules, new culture, but we find a way to do that. Yeah. So I think that we learned how to shift for the job, and I think that can be tremendously rewarding. And that happens when showrunners get, switched out, which happens. And then you're like, okay, we have new showrunners, and I got to win this job back, and I got to also be native. Like, I can't go in there and say, I want the job, and now you got to do what I think is a good idea, which we may have done for 2 seasons already. I got to be like, what's your vision? How can I find a way to service your vision? Which comes back to the theme of the conference as a whole, which is that I think thinking about service is really important. And as much as I think we can be ego-driven and we can say, hey, it's great to have the shows and the projects that we've had that are really exciting and give us this name recognition and all that, but the truth is we're servicing the vision of others. And if we do that effectively, there's a glory in that, I think. But I'm curious for you guys, do you find that you compromise your values sometimes in your searches?
I like to think of it as they deserved my compromised pitch. For whatever reason.
Why am I the only person that laughed at that?
You know, I like to put out what we get back.
Right.
You know, showrunners or writer directors who are very involved get that attention from us. Those that are dismissive and aloof don't get the same attention. And it just comes back to collaboration. You know, how much are we being included? How much are we having an effect on the project? You know, we have like right now, we're dealing with a couple projects that are like just off the rails nuts, while we're also dealing with two of like the best things we've ever done. And
which one does Preacher land on? Which one does Preacher land on?
Neither of them. So it's you kind of, I just treat it as relationships. I mean, these are how do these people treat us? Therefore, how do we treat them? And that kind of then is reflected in how dedicated we are to the vision, if there is a vision.
Let's talk about economics a little bit. Like, when did you know the timing was right to hire someone and do you have your people on payroll or not on payroll? Yeah. You have them on payroll. Did you go through the whole process of getting like, insurance and all that fun stuff?
Let me piggyback on that, on what we were just talking about collaborating with and potentially.
You don't want to talk about insurance?
Compromising? I feel like I've learned a lot already up here. I hope that
I feel like if I look out, everyone's gonna be looking at their phone, and I'll be like, "Oh man, we lost all of them."
Well, I don't. Do we do Q&As at the?
Yeah, we actually should do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like I've learned so much, but I don't know if it's helpful to them. But just as far as compromise and everything, I think that there's. I don't. You said like, do you compromise your values? And I thought, what values? And then I thought, do I compromise if I have any? And I thought that I think that the way that we look at projects creatively is. There's like a strategic process to it, so I don't know if that's, I don't think about it like compromise, but I do think about it like, let's send some buns, let's you say, and let's send some super inspirational stuff. And I think that there's actually a joy in covering all of that off. Let's say you're working for a cheesy fashion brand or something like that. You're like, God, this would be amazing if they use this, but let's also look at what they've done in the past. Let's make sure to cover that off and to see the value in all of those songs, even though if they might not be my particular taste, they might be Target's particular taste, or they might be, Budweiser's particular taste.
Which is where your team can come in too, in a sense.
Yeah.
Also, Tom has a very interesting mantra that he throws out every now and then, and I used to always fight it, but I've adopted it now, which is, when things get crazy and you feel like you're dealing with a project where we're compromising ourselves, and it's just, hey, we're plumbers. You get up, you do the job. When you're done with the job, you go home. You're done.
Bleak.
And what?
It's bleak.
But what it has turned into is, and we've talked about this a lot. I'm home every night by 6 p.m. I have dinner with my kids and my wife every night. I don't take phone calls from editing rooms or directors or return emails after 6 p.m. And I've been doing it for 20 years, and I can say that I never feel that, man, like, if only I worked a little bit more on that. Right. Like, never once have I haven't looked back on any project that I thought I could have given a little bit more of myself to it. And the more that goes on, the more I realize, like, everyone's just getting my all the time. And sometimes maybe it's not my 110% passion. But sometimes they are.
It's your skills.
But it's my skills, and that's what they're hiring us for.
I think that I want this plumber. I want the plumber that like gets under the sink and is completely inspired by finding the right valve and cranking the right wrench and everything like that. Because I think that's what our job, when it's good, affords. Whether it's 2 a.m. in the treehouse or at a nice normal working hour. When you're putting music to picture and something clicks and it inspires you and you hope that it inspires the rest of the team that's making that project, that is something really special that I hope that plumbers have, but I bet that it's not as often. And if you have any recommendations for a good plumber, just let me know.
I talked to Gabe Hilfer about being on this panel, and unfortunately he wasn't available, but it was a really inspiring conversation because Gabe runs his company in a very different way from how I do, and I really appreciate the differences. I really appreciate, and I appreciate also that there's, I don't know whether he appreciates any of what I do, but I know that I appreciate what he does, and I appreciate how he operates as a business owner. And I feel like, in a weird way, I'm trying to twist myself into being a successful business owner, but I think that the truth of it is that is a battle for me, and for him it's not. Whereas I know that those 2 a.m. discoveries, I feel really good about them. Like, I feel like good about the body of work and that issue where, again, there's a certain point when you've dug and you find something, you realize this is gonna do something that is truly remarkable. It's like watching an actor and you watch the dailies and you see 3 or 4 takes and then there it is.
You watch dailies?
Yeah.
Why do you watch dailies?
I mean, it depends on the project, but but I mean,
Let's talk about time management after this. There's absolutely no reason you should be watching dailies.
No, that's true. The dailies thing is very much a film nerd's experience, so fair enough. Touche. But I do think that there's something about getting to that right answer. The problem is a lot of times you're working for people who won't necessarily see that or recognize that or even really appreciate it. And then you're really doing that time management problem where you're like, okay, let's be honest. This is a procedural. This is a show that needs to just get docked in on time and get out on time. We got to hire the right people to make the job happen. We got to help the editors stop putting in, Steely Dan everywhere. And hopefully...
Why?
You want to clear Steely Dan? I think Randall Wixson's here. Is Randall here? Let's talk to Randall about that. But I think that that's one of those things where, like, to Manish's point, I really do think there's something very honorable about being that plumber that does extraordinarily successful work within the parameters of the project. And if there's anything that I can really hold myself accountable to for making my team's job hard, it's not recognizing what really needs to be done on a project and going too far to certain degrees and requiring a level of delivery that ultimately only we are noticing.
Yeah.
I think that's something which I'm trying to learn from.
Speaking of which, Thomas put together this entire conference, if you guys didn't know. So. You went off the rails with this one, and thank you for it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.